The ventilator alarm began shrieking at 11:52 p.m. on a Tuesday in late November. I know the exact minute because I had just glanced at the wall clock above the nursing station. A habit of mine, the physician's compulsion to timestamp everything. What followed was not a medical event I observed. It was one I experienced. My name is Dr. Tariq Ben Lamin. I am, or was, a board-certified pulmonologist at a university hospital in the north of England. I was 44 years old, the son of Algerian immigrants, a practicing Muslim who had never missed a single Fajr prayer in over 2 decades. And for 20 minutes on that Tuesday in November, I was clinically dead. What happened during those 20 minutes changed everything. Not gradually, not after years of quiet reflection, immediately, irrevocably, at the cellular level of who I was. I want to tell you the full story, because I lost nearly everything telling it, and I would lose it all again without hesitation. My father, Nassim Ben Lamin, arrived in Bradford from Oran in 1979 with 40 pounds sterling and a medical degree that British authorities refused to recognize for 3 years. He worked nights stacking shelves while studying to pass their examinations. He never complained. Submission to God's will, tawakkul, was not a concept to my father. It was oxygen. My mother Jamila taught Quranic recitation to neighborhood children in our sitting room every Saturday morning. I can still hear the sound, 12 young voices rising and falling in the Arabic cadences that form the architecture of my childhood. I was not a reluctant Muslim. I want to be precise about this. I was not a man dragged to the prayer mat by tradition or parental pressure. I believed. I genuinely, deeply believed that Islam was the final and complete revelation from God, that the Quran was uncorrupted, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the seal of all prophecy, and that paradise awaited those whose scales of deeds tilted rightward on the day of reckoning. That last part, the scales, was where the fracture always lived, though I didn't permit myself to examine it directly. I prayed 5 times daily. I fasted Ramadan strictly and often added voluntary fasts on Mondays and Thursdays, as the Prophet had done. I gave well beyond the obligatory 2.5% in zakat. I had performed Hajj at 37, weeping at the Kaaba with an intensity that startled me. By any external measure, I was a model Muslim. And yet, beneath all of it, in the place where honest men keep the thoughts they won't speak aloud, I was quietly terrified. Because no one, not the most devout scholar, not the most saintly elder, could tell me with certainty that I was saved. Islamic theology does not offer assurance of salvation. It offers a framework for attempting to earn it. And attempting is all anyone can do, because only Allah knows the final ledger. Even the Prophet himself, according to the Hadith, said he did not know his own fate in the hereafter. If the man for whom the entire faith was revealed could not be certain, what hope had I? I added more prayers, more fasting, more charity, more Quran. I memorized additional surahs. I corrected my pronunciation of Arabic so that each recitation would be accepted. I counseled patients with unusual gentleness, thinking it might tip the unseen scales. I lay awake in the early hours, not from insomnia, but from a low, persistent terror that it still might not be enough. My wife Suad knew something was wrong in the weeks before that November night. She would find me sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, not reading, just sitting. She would ask, and I would say I was thinking about a patient. It was never entirely a lie. I thought about patients constantly, about the ones I couldn't save, about the brevity of lives that could end between one heartbeat and the next. But what I was really thinking about was my own mortality and the judgment waiting beyond it. The night it happened, I had finished a punishing 14-hour shift. 2 patients had deteriorated significantly. One, a young woman named Philippa, had gone on to mechanical ventilation that afternoon after her lungs abruptly failed, an outcome I had been trying to prevent for 48 hours. When I finally left the ward, I felt the specific heaviness that only comes from having done everything correctly and still watched someone suffer. I performed Isha prayer in the hospital's interfaith room, a converted storage cupboard with a compass marking the direction of Mecca on a small laminated card. I prayed with unusual concentration that night, though I could not have told you why. Afterward, driving home in the darkness, I found myself speaking quietly, not formally, not in Arabic, not in the structured language of Salah, just speaking, talking toward God the way a frightened child talks toward a parent in an unlit hallway. I don't know if what I felt is enough. I don't know if I've ever been enough. If you can hear this, if any of this reaches you, I need to know. I didn't recognize it then as the most honest prayer I had ever offered. I arrived home. Suad was asleep. I ate cold rice standing at the kitchen counter and went upstairs without waking her. I was unconscious within minutes of lying down. An hour later, perhaps less, I woke to a pressure in my chest so absolute it seemed geological. As a pulmonologist, I am professionally acquainted with the ways breathing can be disrupted. This was different. My lungs were not the problem. Something at the center of my chest was collapsing inward, as though gravity had inverted inside my ribcage. I reached for Suad. I managed to say her name once, before the room inverted, and the floor came up to meet me with no warning at all. Suad's voice, screaming my name, was the last sound I heard from the physical world. What came next does not submit easily to language. I will use words because words are all I have, but I want to be clear that they are inadequate, the way a child's drawing is an inadequate map of a continent. I was separate from my body, not as a metaphor, not as a sensation of dissociation, truly separate. I was aware of Suad kneeling beside me on the bedroom floor, her hands pressing against my chest, her voice hoarse from shouting my name into the phone, and at me simultaneously. I could see the gray at her temple that she covered carefully every 6 weeks. I could see the small scar on her left wrist from a cooking accident in 2009. I was seeing these things from a vantage point no living human occupies. Then the physical room began to lose its authority. Not gradually. It simply began to matter less, like a sound growing distant, not because you are moving away, but because something louder has begun. The darkness I entered was not absence. It had texture, intention. I moved through it the way a word moves through the mind before it becomes sound. Formlessly, purposefully. I expected nothing. I had no framework for this. Islamic teaching about the afterlife centers on the barzakh, the interval state, and the questioning angels Munkar and Nakir who appear at the graveside. I had no grave. I had a bedroom floor in Bradford and a wife screaming my name. But the angels did not come. What came instead was light. Not a light. The distinction matters enormously. A light has a source and edges and can be traced back to a mechanism. What I encountered had none of these properties. It was not produced by anything. It simply was, the way truth is. Not created, just finally visible. And within the light, or constituting the light, or perhaps identical to the light, was a presence. I knew him. That is the sentence that has cost me the most to say publicly, because knowing him meant that something in me had always known him, which meant that every theological argument I had constructed over 44 years had been built around a recognition I was refusing to complete. I knew him the way you know your own name when you're still half asleep, not as information, but as something prior to information. He looked nothing like the images that appear in Western religious painting. There was nothing soft or decorative about him. He was a man of the Eastern Mediterranean, dark-complected, eyes carrying the particular quality of someone who has seen the full range of human suffering and has not been diminished by it. But his physical appearance was the least significant thing about him, the way a letter's handwriting is the least significant thing about its contents. He said my name, not with sound, with recognition. The difference is the difference between being named and being known. I could not speak in the formal sense, but I could communicate what I was, which was terrified, resistant, and utterly unable to look away. I am not God, I thought at him. You are not what I believe. This is a test. This is precisely the kind of test the scholars warned about. A beautiful deception at the moment of death, designed to make you die in disbelief. His response was not an argument. He simply let me feel what was present in him, the way a room lets you feel its temperature the moment you enter. And what was present in him was love so structurally different from anything I had previously encountered that the word itself almost fails. It was not affection. It was not approval. It was not the conditional warmth I had spent 44 years trying to earn from a God whose scales I could never see. It was something more like the bedrock under a building, not felt most of the time, but what everything rests on. He showed me my life, not as a judgment, as a witness. I watched myself at 7 years old, waking before dawn in our cold Bradford house to pray beside my father. I watched myself in medical school, studying until 2 in the morning, driven by something that I had always called ambition, but recognized now as a search. I watched the genuine moments, the patience I had sat with in the dark hours, the kindnesses I had offered that no one saw, the real love I had for Suad, for our children, for the faith I had held as tightly as I could. He said, every time you reached toward truth, you were reaching toward me. Then I saw my failures, not as a ledger, not as evidence for a prosecution, but the way a doctor reads a scan, neutrally, completely. The pride disguised as religious rigor, the condescension toward colleagues who prayed differently or not at all. The years I had given my family the portion of myself that remained after I had given everything to my career and my religious obligations, never understanding that presence was the point. I expected to be destroyed by this seeing. Instead, he said, I carried those. That is why I came. I asked him, or the part of me that can still frame questions asked him, about the cross, because that was the fulcrum. In Islam, the crucifixion is the central denial. The Quran states clearly that Jesus was not killed, not crucified, that it only appeared so. If he did not die, then nothing Christians claim about him can hold. He did not argue the theology. He showed me. I will not describe what I saw except to say this. The crucifixion was not a defeat. It was the most deliberate act in human history, a God choosing the only mechanism by which the distance between holiness and human failure could be collapsed entirely, not diminished, not compensated for, collapsed. The gap made nothing by the one person who was simultaneously on both sides of it, and then the empty tomb, not as symbol, as event, the stone, the absence, the morning light entering a space that had held death and no longer did. I said, wordlessly, with everything I was, why didn't anyone tell us this? Why was it hidden from us? It was not hidden, he said. It was in what you were given, between the lines of what was taken away. He spoke about grace. I want to record this as precisely as I can, because it is the part that demolished me most completely. I had spent my life in a theological framework where salvation was an outcome, something produced by sufficient effort, unlocked by sufficient obedience. And within that framework, I had labored with total sincerity and total fear, because no amount of effort produces certainty, and I had always known it. He said, you cannot produce what I am offering to give. It was finished before you were born. You only have to stop trying to earn what has already been purchased for you. I wept in a place where I had no eyes. How long will you reject what you have always wanted? He said. Not as accusation, as an invitation so old it predated my birth. I don't know the exact moment I stopped fighting it. I only know that at some point the fighting stopped, and what remained was surrender. Not the resigned surrender of defeat, but the surrender of a man who has been wandering in fog and has finally found a wall, and understands that the wall is the beginning of the building, and the building is home. I said his name, not as a prophet's name, as Lord. He told me to go back. I argued the way a child argues at bedtime, with full knowledge that the argument would fail and a desperate wish that it wouldn't. He told me that Suad needed to hear what I had seen, that there were people within reach of my voice who were carrying the same private terror I had carried and who deserved to know what I now knew. I will be with you, he said, not occasionally, always. Then I was falling back through everything, through the texture of the dark, through the collapsing distance between the spiritual and the physical, through the cold fluorescent atmosphere of an emergency department. And I crashed back into a body that felt like a suit of armor that someone had dropped from a great height. Pain. My chest, reconstructed by hands I hadn't seen. My lungs, forced back into operation by machines and compressions, and the chemical vocabulary of resuscitation. I opened my eyes. Above me, ceiling tiles, a masked face, a voice asking if I could hear. I could hear. The first thing I said, I am told because I don't fully remember the first minutes, was not a number or a name or a medical assessment. It was, he is real. I saw him. Jesus Christ is real. The room's atmosphere changed in a way I felt before I saw it. The weeks that followed were the most devastating and most clarifying of my life. Suad listened to everything I told her, for hours, across 2 long nights, and then, quietly, told me she could not follow me there. She did not leave immediately. She stayed for the children, for the shape of the life we had built. But something between us had shifted in a way that neither of us could repair by will alone. My parents stopped answering my calls after the 3rd week. My father, who had worked for 3 years stacking shelves in the dark so that he could practice medicine in the country that had invited him, told me in a single short conversation that I had dishonored everything he had given me. He did not say he loved me before he ended the call. The hospital was more careful. There was no formal dismissal, only a quiet conversation about the challenges of serving a diverse patient population, about trust, about how certain public statements made certain professional relationships complicated. I was offered a reduced role. I declined. I left. I am a different kind of doctor now. I work part-time for a charitable medical organization that serves refugees and displaced people. I earn considerably less. I sleep with the specific ease of someone who no longer carries a scale they can't read. I speak sometimes to groups, mostly former Muslims, some still practicing, some not, all of them carrying the particular loneliness of a doubt they were never given language for. The ones who reach out to me privately often say the same thing in different words. I have been trying so hard for so long, and I am still terrified. I don't know how to want something I was told was wrong to want. I tell them what I was told in a room made of light, in the 20 minutes when my body lay cooling on a hospital floor in Bradford. You cannot earn what has already been freely given. The effort was always unnecessary. The terror was always a lie. What you have been searching for has been searching for you. I am not asking you to abandon your community or your heritage, or the Arabic calligraphy on your walls. I am asking you to consider the possibility that the God who made you is not waiting with a scale, that he already settled the debt, that his arms are not crossed. They are open. That is what I saw. That is what I came back to tell you.